Hello and welcome to the Care It Out Sleep Show, a podcast for tired parents who are searching for a bit more sleep the caring way. I'm your host, Kerry Secker, infant sleep consultant, founder of my unique sleep approach, Care It Out, and your caring sleep supporter. I really hope you'll join me on my mission to get Smalls a settled night's sleep without the tears, training or techniques. I love talking about sleep and I can't wait to share my sleep subjects with you. My approach to getting you more sleep is simple, straightforward, but above all, it's got to make sense and feel best for you. Ready to get more sleep? Then let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Care It Out Sleep Show. You are listening to your host, Kerry Secker, and I really hope this podcast finds you well. Whether you have listened to every single episode of the Sleep Show, I can't believe there are 35 episodes now, and you're a seasoned sleep show stalker, or you're picking up this podcast for the first time, big welcome. And as always, my intention and aim behind every single podcast I put out there is that it's reassuring, it's useful, it's informative, but I also want to make sure that I am sharing really straightforward and simple sleep suggestions that you could put in place if they resonate for you at home, and just supporting you to a more settled night's sleep and supporting you to make changes to your small sleep with care. So this is episode 36, Changing Bedtime Boundaries is a Biggie. So in this episode, I am going to share 6 sleep suggestions to how to change your bedtime boundaries with care, or how your small falls to sleep. And I'm also, I love answering your questions. So before this episode, I put out on Instagram and Facebook, what did you want to know about bedtime boundaries? And actually, I got a lot of questions back, but there was a main theme. So I think I've got 4 or 5 questions. So I'm going to go through my 6 sleep suggestions for you, and then I'm going to answer your questions at the end. But before we do that, I just want to start off with some reassurance for you, because I am here for reassurance and I am always going to reassure you first. So your bedtime boundary is simply how your small falls asleep at naps and bedtime. And quite often, bedtime boundaries are called other things. The most common ones I've heard over the years are sleep props, crutches, negative sleep associations. There's often something quite negative about them. And if you've been following me for a while, you might know this already, but it drives me a bit bonkers, actually a lot bonkers. And this is because you are never, ever a negative sleep association. And there's absolutely nothing negative about your small needing you to fall asleep. Feeding to sleep is feeding to sleep. Rocking to sleep is rocking to sleep. Cuddling to sleep is cuddling to sleep. They're natural, they're normal. And I think it's really important to change the conversation around these and try and normalise them. Let's not turn them into something they are not. They are not negative. And on my approach, I do try to keep things really super simple. I do know I like to waffle on and overshare, but I really do try and keep it simple. My approach is it's about finding what works for you and doing that. There is no right or wrong on my approach. Even if it isn't working, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It might not be the right or the best thing for you. I 100% don't believe there are no negative sleep associations and no bad bed habits on my approach. And I am always going to go to that first. I'm never going to suggest to make changes or push that you need to get your little one to self-settle or self-soothe. Always reassure you first. Natural, normal, and if it's working for you, you don't need to stop. So if feeding, rocking, cuddling, holding to sleep, supporting your small to sleep is working for you, you're small and their sleep, you enjoy it, you don't want to change it, 100% you do not need to change anything unless you want to. And I think it's really important to note that falling asleep independently isn't a milestone or mandatory, and before they become independent, being dependent is all part of that learning process. And I know this isn't always easy, because falling asleep independently is often bandied about as the key, the absolute key. If you get your small to self-settle or self-soothe at bedtime, you're going to have a settled night's sleep. It's the key to stitch all their sleep cycles together. It's the key to everything. But like most things on my approach, it really depends on the baby. And again, I'm always going to go to reassurance first and share this and normalise it. Falling asleep independently isn't always a given or guaranteed to a settled night's sleep. There, I said it. And that can often be a little bit of a shock. Falling asleep independently has got nothing to do with self-soothing or self-settling anyway. That's a whole other episode. And I'm always very honest and upfront. For some smalls, we do work on bedtime boundaries, and how they go to sleep can have a real impact on them sleeping at night time or getting them to stitch their sleep cycles together. But it is definitely not a one-size-fits-all answer. And again, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I am a massive believer in that one size anything sucks. And I think it's really important for you to know that some smalls do put themselves to sleep and wake up at night time. I see them in practice all the time, and it can be really baffling because they're like, Kerry, they're putting themselves to sleep independently, they're awake, they're going to their cot or their bed, I leave the room, I hear them mooch around and they go to sleep. Why are they waking at night time? And some smalls don't put themselves to sleep and are sleeping at their best. They're either sleeping through the night or they are waking up the feeds they genuinely need. And I see this, honestly, hand on heart, I see this all the time in my practice. Babies that are breastfed to sleep, fed to sleep, rocked to sleep, cuddled to sleep, fall asleep in another room, and they go into their bed and they're either sleeping through or sleeping through the night. So for me, it will always depend on what's going on for your small, and it's really important to look at everything going on, or everything's linked for them, so looking at everything that's going around that. And not just focus down on this, you've got to get them to self-settle or self-soothe or fall asleep independently. I really love the for some rule, but not everyone. So for some babies, looking at the bedtime boundaries is the key to getting to a settled night's sleep. It isn't until they are not feeding to sleep or not being rocked, or they're falling asleep independently in their cot, the night settle. But it's definitely not the case for many, and it is always the last thing I look at. Bedtime boundaries, changing bedtime boundaries, it is a biggie, definitely, and it is the last thing I look at for two real big reasons, really. One is that it's not that one size fits all guarantee or given to a settled night's sleep. Two, in fact, there's three reasons. So one, it's not a guarantee or given to a settled night's sleep. Two, it really doesn't need to change unless you want it to. I'm never ever going to tell you to change something that you enjoy, that you just don't want to stop. But lastly, if we do look at bedtime boundaries, we do it last, so we've got everything else in place first before we change it. And 9 times out of 10 that helps with the settled night's sleep, and if it doesn't, you're in a good place to actually start making those changes for you. And it's really important. Making bedtime boundary changes, even with care, is a biggie, not only for your small but for you too. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Quite often parenting is constant conflicting emotions. You might want to get a little bit more independence yourself. You might not want to do bedtime every night. You might want to make these changes so someone else can do bedtime. For whatever reason, parents never have to explain themselves to me, but at the same time, if you're not doing it, you miss them, you want to go and look at them, you want to go and give them a sniff, it's all completely normal. So making changes to how your small falls asleep or their bedtime boundaries, it can be done with care. This is not controlled crying out. And again, I'm very honest up front, I'm not anti those things, it's just not my approach. But it is a biggie for your small and for you too, and it definitely does take time. So here's 6 sleep suggestions to help you make big bedtime boundary changes. Number 1, break the big changes down into smaller steps. One of the biggest things I'm always sharing with you is to let go of expectations. And this is so true when we're talking about bedtime boundaries. You don't have to do it all in one go. It feels overwhelming. Again, I'm always very honest. For some babies, bedtime boundary, it's a balance, because as I've mentioned before, for some babies, you are able to rock, bounce, feed, jiggle them to sleep, put them to sleep in another room, put them in their cot, they'll sleep through. Where for some, we do need to be mindful of what's happening at bedtime boundary, because it can impact the stitching of the sleep cycles. And if we've got to that point where for some smalls in practice, we have got to the point where in order for the nights to settle, we needed to get to the point where they were going, the smalls were going to sleep awake in their bed or cot, and the parents were out of the room. So going from where you are now, feeding, rocking, supporting them to sleep, whatever you are doing at bedtime, to perhaps going out of the room, can feel massive. Like, it just feels, I wish we were face to face and I could see your face. It feels massive. It's like running a marathon without any training. So my suggestion would be to always break down these changes into smaller steps and remind yourself that you don't have to do it all in one go. And the reason why I break it down into more manageable steps, probably for a good couple of reasons. One is, for some, it's because that bedtime boundary is a balance. So on one end, you've got feeding, supporting, rocking, doing something to get them to sleep. But on the other end of the scale, you've got getting out of the room. For some of your smalls, it will be enough just to move away from feeding, from going to feeding to sleep to holding in your arms. For some, it will be enough to go from holding in your arms, rocking in your arms, to standing still. For some babies and smalls, it will be enough to go just going into their cot a little bit awake. For some, it will be enough that they are going to sleep in their cot or their bed with the parents in the room. And for some, it's not until we get out of the room at bedtime that the nights settle. So there's a range there, and it always depends on your baby. So I'm always about, I hope this is making sense, but I'm always the path of least resistance. So we don't need to go gung-ho and get you out of the room if that isn't, if your baby or your small, sleep is going to settle if we just make one tiny change. So the number one reason why I break it down into smaller chunks or smaller steps is it just makes it so much easier on everybody. Don't do anything more than you have to do. Make it easy for yourself, because for chances are you might not have to get out of the room. And also the other reason why this is breaking it down into more manageable changes, this is what makes it more manageable and sustainable, because it feels achievable. If I said to you, for example, I would never say this, by the way, if I said to you tonight, right, you're going to put your small in their cot, leave the room, and they're going to put themselves to sleep, chances are you would be laughing in my face and rolling your eyes at me going, that's just not going to happen. You can't imagine it happen, you can't see it happening, so chances are it isn't going to happen. But if I said just make one tiny change where we're just going to rock a little bit less, or move the breastfeed or the bottle feed up the routine a little bit, it can make a really, really big difference. And doing this as well, it does take a little bit longer. I'm going to come on to time in a minute, but doing this is what tends to make it less tears as well. And as you probably know, I'm all here for that. This is care it out, not cry it out. So breaking down the big changes into smaller steps, I think, to summarize, take off that pressure and the expectation that you are going to do it all in one go, that you're just going to pop your small in their cot, take away the support, what they need to actually fall asleep, and get out of the room. Break it down into smaller steps. And again, sometimes it's enough to just go from instead of feeding to sleep, to go to rocking. Instead of going from rocking all the way to sleep, you could just hold them in your arms. If they fall asleep in your arms, you could try getting them down into the cot a little bit earlier. And it sounds so crazy, but these really small changes can make a big difference to how your small sleeps at night time. Number 2 is overtiredness is completely normal, but it's usually only temporary. So I'm going to be honest with you, if we've got to the point where we're working on changing how your small goes to sleep, and we're making big bedtime boundary changes, it's so very unlikely we're going to be able to do that without your small getting overtired. Overtiredness is all part of the process of making changes of how they go to sleep. And this is for 2 main reasons. Number 1 is that we are doing, even if it's really small, we're doing something different. So it's normal that they're going to take a much longer time to get to sleep. But also it does push everything a little bit later. Because that's just the nature of making those changes. If we start making a change is strange. They are going to take longer to settle to sleep, and it is going to take you more time as well to get them to sleep. It's all normal. I actually think now I've said that aloud, they're probably both the same thing. But yeah, it is completely, overtiredness is all part of changing the bedtime boundary. I don't think I've ever worked with parent in practice where their small didn't get a little bit overtired, sometimes a lot overtired when we're making those changes, which is why I always make sure that this is the best sensible step to do, that actually it is the bedtime boundary that's the causing unsettled night sleep. And it's completely normal that you're going to worry about it. Telling a parent not to worry is like telling me not to eat cake. It is not going to happen. So it's completely normal to worry that they're going to get overtired. It's going to have an impact on the night. Sometimes it does, but again, it's only temporary. And yeah, just want to reassure you that it's all part of the process. I've never managed to find a way of changing a bedtime boundary with not getting them just a little bit overtired. That's just part of it. And sometimes it can feel like we are going sideways a little bit because we work first on making them not overtired before we get to that point. But the reason why I do that is because I'm always getting you in the best position to make changes. So to summarise this, overtiredness is all normal. It's all part of the process about changing the bedtime boundary. We're making a change is strange, and they're going to take much longer to get to sleep. I'm going to come on to time in a minute. It's all completely normal. We are asking them to do more of the work themselves, but the overtiredness is usually only temporary, and that time comes down very quickly. But it is normal for you to worry about it. And number 3 is that changes take time. It's going to take much, much longer than you think it will. And I know I bleat on about time all the time, but it's so, so important. Again, my whole approach, it's about breaking down the steps, and the trade-off of taking a little bit more time is that we minimise the tears, which that's, again, I don't like assumption, that's often the mother of all muck-ups, but I'm assuming that is why probably most parents, most of you actually resonate with my approach, because that's just something that doesn't feel right for you. So again, it's about letting go of that expectation. I would always encourage you to let go of that expectation that you're going to make your one small step. You're going to make that one, whenever you next do it, you're going to make that one small step, and your small is going to fall asleep in exactly the same time as they normally would, and there's going to be no adjustment. This is care it out, not cry it out. So there's no leaving them to crying it out. But it's not, I'm always very honest, it's not a magic unicorn approach, and making changes, it works because you put the work in, but it does take time. And the reason why it takes time, 2 big reasons. One is, again, change is strange. So whenever we do something different, they're like, whoa, what's going on? And it can feel a little bit clumsy, just a little bit bumpy, and then that means that they're going to take longer to settle to sleep. And then the other thing is that we're asking them to do a little bit more work of putting themselves to sleep, sometimes a lot, and that can definitely take time. And I've got this thing called Amazon Prime Patience, where I honestly do this myself. I do something once and I'm just expect it to work first time really quickly, but that very rarely works on my approach. Again, sometimes it does, but for many, those changes changing bedtime boundary takes time. You're probably looking on the first night ballpark is probably around an hour and 15, which will feel like an eternity to you when you're making changes. And depending on how many changes we're making, how big the changes we're making, you're probably looking between 2 to 4 weeks to make some really big changes. But again, it always depends on the baby, how they adapt to change. Most are often very adaptable and will surprise us. But again, everybody's tolerance for change is very different. And sometimes in practice, I'll work with a family and they're doing exactly what I would have suggested already, but it's that consistency and just surrendering to it, that it's going to take time. And it's so hard making changes, so hard making changes, but committing to that time, that is what moves a lot of families forward. And before I go on to the next one, I just want to reassure you that ballpark, some will do it much sooner than that, some might take a little bit longer. two things. That time is only temporary and it is likely to come down very quickly. The more practice and patience they get at doing it makes a big difference. But also it's just that familiarity as well. The more they do it, the easier everybody's going to find it, and it gets quicker and quicker each night. And then the other thing is, you are always in charge and in control on my approach, and I don't want you to, yes, it takes time. There's often a period of adjustment where they're awake. It might not feel easy. They're not, it's not a totally tear-free approach, but it feels comfortable to you. But if any point your small is hot and sweaty, you're hot and sweaty, just park it. My whole approach is all about, if something is working for you, brilliant, we don't need to change it. If it isn't working for you, we can try other things, give other things a go. And if that doesn't work, we simply go back to what we were doing before, your bed baseline. I think that's really important. Where am I? I think this is the fourth thing. Yeah, number 4 is giving them what they need isn't giving in. This is all part of the process. And again, it comes back to expectation. I would never, ever expect you're small or ask you to take away that rocking, the breastfeed at bedtime, the cuddle, the eye contact, if they needed it, because it's all part of the process. If you're small, for example, your small needs rocking to sleep, and we stop rocking, and in the beginning we say, right, we're going to go completely gung-ho, there's going to be no more rocking, I'm not going to rock tonight at bedtime. That is what your small needs to get to sleep, the rocking. And without it, they are going to find it's what they need to get to sleep, but also that's what's familiar to them. And any deviation from that, again, they're like, whoa, what's going on? So it can feel really, really counterproductive, this. But this is at the very heart of my approach, really. The core of Care It Out is that it's all part of the process. It's not about taking away that rocking, that feed, the cuddling, the support straight away. It's part of the process. It's always okay to give them what they need, and it isn't giving in. It can feel so counterproductive, doesn't it? Because we're trying to get them to get to sleep without it. But this is Care It Out. It's the opposite of control crying. It's about giving them what they need so they feel safe and settled, but stopping just before they fall all the way to sleep, or get them into their cot just before they fall asleep. And that can make a really big difference. So please, please, please never ever be afraid to give them that support, or feel that you need to pull that support away from bedtime all in one go. I always keep that in, and I think that is a really good example with the rocking. If you are trying, for example, you're trying to get your baby or your small into their cot, and they get to the point where they're crying, we either leave them, the two choices there are either we leave them in their cot to cry, they just get more and more upset, dysregulated, and then they're unable to calm themselves down or self-regulate, or we pick them up, rock them, get them calm again, try again. And my approach is always that two things here is that they're not going to fall asleep once they're dysregulated. They're just getting further and further away from sleep. So it's always okay to keep that support in, even if it feels a little bit counterproductive. Number 5 is, what is number 5? Yes, start with bedtime if you can. Now, this isn't going to be possible if you are only changing how they go down for naps. My suggestion would be to start with the first nap of the day. And there's 2 reasons for this. One is that first nap of the day, it's not always, but it's usually a lot smoother and a lot easier to make changes at that one for. But also, again, it comes back to expectation. If I said, right, every nap you're going to stop rocking, or they're going to fall asleep in their cot, you just feel the whole day like it feels so overwhelming before you've got started. So the key to making big changes with care is to really step it down, take the path of least resistance, and do each little bit at a time. And then if that does take, well, actually it is going to take longer. Changing how they fall asleep for naps does take quite a bit of time. You've always got that, the next nap as backup. You can give them 15-20 minutes more to sleep in the afternoon, and you're not going to be constantly worrying that they're going to get overtired. So really step it down. And then if you are making changes at bedtime and naps, or you're just doing bedtime, I would just start with bedtime. And the reason why I suggest doing this Again, it's twofold. One, at bedtime, we've got the sleep hormone melatonin on our side, and you know at some point that they're going to go to sleep. So those two things definitely help. But also, it's not as simple as, I wish it were that simple, that you do something at bedtime and then you can take it into naps. But if you are do something at bedtime, it's more likely to work because of those two things. Your small gets confident with it, you get confident with it, and then once you've started doing that and that feels a little bit more familiar, you're doing it consistently and comfortably, then you can take it to naps. If we are changing naps and bedtime at the first time for together, which happens a lot in practice, that is generally speaking how I would suggest we do it. If we do it the other way round, what tends to happen is it's going to take much longer, because now we know that big changes take time to avoid the tears. Everything gets pushed later, and then by the time they get to bedtime, nobody, not you, you're small, wants to start making those changes. So generally speaking, I would start with bedtime first, for all of those reasons. Melatonin, you know they're going to go to sleep at some point, and once you've done that, then you can move it into naps. And again, it just comes back to path of least resistance for me for everything. And then this is the last one. Number 6 is make changes when you can. I'll be honest with you, there's never the right or best time to make changes. There's always something. For lots of families, it feels, some are really excited once they've got a plan, but for some it can feel a little bit worrying, a little bit anxious about it. So there will always be something. Change is strange, huh? But my suggestion would be to try to avoid doing it when you've got lots going on, like if you've got a busy week at work. I'm trying to think of some examples. You've got a busy week at work, you've got a lot going on with your family, holidays, all of those things with life logistics. I would try to find a week in your diary where make things, always take the path of least resistance. Try to scale the diary back if you can. I know it's not always possible, but try and scale the diary back. Try and get your freezer stocked with some meals beforehand. See, again, sounds so basic, but once you've making change at bedtime boundaries, you probably don't want to go down and cook. Just make life so much easier for yourself, and for that week or 2 weeks that you're making those changes, that you can just be fully present, rest after, be available to your small, be available to yourself when you're making changes. It can make a really big difference. I really hope you found those 6 sleep suggestions useful. So I'm going to break them down again. 1 is to break the big changes down into smaller steps. 2 is overtiredness is completely normal. It is all part of the process. Number 3, changes take time, much more time than you think it will. Number 5, I've lost count. No, number 4. Number 4 or 5, giving them what they need isn't giving in. Number 5, try to do bedtime first if you can. And then number 6 is make changes when you can. Try not to do too much when you're making those changes. What I'm going to do now, I really hope you found that useful and there's something in there that you can use. Now I'm just going to go through, I've got 4 questions. As I said before, earlier, I asked you some questions because it's all about you here. And I got loads back, but there was 4 real common ones, and I'm going to go through these for you now. So number 1, what can I do if they keep standing and cock cruising but get overtired and teary? Well, excuse me. So this is completely normal. It's completely normal that once your small has got the skill of standing and cock cruising, that they want to do it. Gone are the days where you just put your baby down and they'll stay, they don't move, and they're going to drift off to sleep. So again, reassurance first. Standing, cock cruising is all part of the process. And it's, again, one of the biggest things that I share with parents is it's not our role to get them to sleep. I'm going to say that again. It isn't our role to get them to sleep. Our role is to, or your role because you're doing it, is to give them the time to do it, because time is so important on my approach. but we also support them. We can't coax, we can't control, we can't cajole them to sleep. It's always those things. And I know your small might not be giving you this impression, but they do know how to fall asleep. It's just sometimes it's such a new thing. It takes practice and patience. I just wanted to reassure you, standing cock cruising is all part of it. But for some, they do get really overtired, which again, I've gone through, that's all part of the process. And then they start crying. And once they start crying, they get dysregulated. It's very difficult to calm them down. So there's two things here that could really help. One is I would start your bedtime routine and settling them to sleep. Just 10-15 minutes earlier can make a big difference. This happens all the time in practice, and that would always be my go-to sleep suggestion, is if they get to the point where they're standing, they're really teary and overtired, just bring everything 10-15 minutes earlier. And that can help massively as well. And the other thing is if they are getting to the point where they're overtired and teary, we might need to give them a little bit more support to help them on their way. And this is always okay on my approach. And to do this, generally speaking, if they are standing and cock cruising, but emotionally easy, so there's no crying, they're quite happy, my suggestion would be to give them the practice and patience. As long as they're safe, give them that practice and patience to fall asleep. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. In order for them to practice how to get to sleep, they've got to learn how to do it, but it can be very frustrating. However, if they are getting really teary and overtired and they're standing up, my suggestion would be, as soon as they start standing up and getting a bit teary, would be to have a big kiss and cuddle, pick them up, even if they need picking up, pick them up out of the cot, get them calm again, put them back down. And I try to avoid getting into that situation so that we're not getting in that jack in the bed situation, but sometimes actually putting them down, like showing them how to do it and getting them on their way, like laying them down before they get to that point, holding hands, that can often move you forward as well. But hopefully that will give you some suggestions to start with. What can I do if they wake when transferred and they start crying? Again, reassurance first. This is completely normal. When your small falls asleep on you, we transfer them down. They can't assume that it's you putting them down. It comes back to safety. So for many, one, it's a safety instinct, but also they're disturbed. I think I would get pretty peeved off. Well, actually, I'd also be amazed if I fell asleep at my desk and then my husband picked me up and then put me down. We don't like being disturbed when we're asleep, or there's very few people that like that. So again, it is completely normal. My suggestion would be to... Actually, I think there's three things I would suggest. One, I'd bring bedtime very slightly earlier. Again, I wouldn't go crazy. I wouldn't overcompensate. But just 5 or 10 minutes can sometimes make a big difference. Sometimes the more overtired they are, the more they resist that transfer. The other thing is you could try and sounds bonkers, but you could try and put your small down feet first. Quite often, when there's I don't call it the tricky transfer for nothing, but quite often it's a bit of a bed bomb trying to get them down. And what we tend to do is put the head down first, because that's the precious cargo, and then the feet. But switching it around, putting their feet down first, kind of doing it sideways and then laying their head down, sometimes that overrides the reflex to wake up and cry, and that can help as well. And sometimes when you transfer them down, putting them with your hand on them, keeping that contact, that can help as well. And then if that doesn't work, I'm always very honest. For some smalls, with the best will in the world, they will always cry every time you transfer them down. They just don't like it. Again, every baby's completely different. So if that does keep happening and we're just going round in that cycle, like, I'm all for making changes with care as long as we're moving forward. But if we get sleep stuck, we get a little bit stuck in that cycle, then there's chances are there's a little change we can make. So actually trying putting your baby or your small down just before they fall asleep can really help. That with the crying on transfer. And if that really doesn't work, then I'd probably suggest instead of holding to sleep or feeding to sleep and then putting them down and just going around in this cycle, it can feel really super scary. But my suggestion would be to go gung-ho and take the time to support them to fall asleep in their cot or their bed rather than on you first. So again, quite a few things there that can make a big difference. Number 3, what can I do if they get upset the moment they get into their cot? Upset is a very subjective word, isn't it? In fact, most things small and sleep related are very subjective. And again, I'm always very honest. This is care it out. So it's not control crying, leaving them to cry, but I'm always very honest. It's not always totally tear-free or noise-free, and it can be hard work. Even making changes very gently, taking time, it can be hard work. So it is normal when we're changing something. Change is strange. I keep saying that, but change is strange. They're not daft. They notice, and they're allowed to go, ooh, and get a little bit angry, a little bit peed off that we're making a change. So sometimes, again, I wouldn't want you to do anything that you didn't feel comfortable, but sometimes giving them that practice to fall asleep in their cot, like putting them down, staying with them, reassuring them just for a moment, give them a little bit of practice and patience before doing something, that can make a big difference. I mean, if they're going into their cot and every time they go in there they are completely losing their shiz, then I might be looking at other options. But if they're just a little bit those kind of noises, and you feel comfortable, my suggestion would be eye contact, say a little sleepy sentence, make physical contact, and even if it's just for a couple of seconds, just see whether that helps before supporting them and repeating that. Sometimes that's the key to moving forward too. And if they do go absolutely batshit every time you get them into their cot and you transfer them, again, for some families, they're dead set, like this is what this needs to happen and this is what I want to do, then they might choose to really stick with it and put that boundary in. But my suggestion would be to two things. One, again, try and bring bedtime a little bit earlier. 5-10 minutes can make the world of difference. And the other thing is if they do get upset going into the cot, it might be time to consider a floor bed. Floor beds aren't for every single family, they're not for everybody, but they can sometimes be a really nice compromise, because for you're small, it just does away with that transfer, that going from you cozy warmth into the cot. You don't have to transfer them because you can lay them down and you can get up close to them and support them off to sleep that way. But you can, and that helps with the tricky transfer and the tearing and the shenanigans when that goes on. But also you'll be able to ninja roll away as well once they're down. So that can be quite a nice compromise, but hopefully there's some bits in there that can help. And then, what age is too late to change their bedtime boundary? Honestly, I don't think it's ever too late. I work all the way up to aged 8. Very rare, just to reassure you, it's very rare that I would get aged 5+, but I do work all the way age up to 8, and I don't think making changes is correlated to how old they are. I've had babies, really young babies, 6-7 months, where we're making bedtime boundary changes and they found it easy, they found it hard. I've had 4-year-olds where we're making really big bedtime boundary changes, and some have found it easy, some have found it hard. So I honestly don't think it's ever too late to change their bedtime boundary if you want to, and I don't think it's any easier or harder on their age, to be honest. Yeah, I think that is it. Well, I hope you found that really useful. If you did, please let me know. And if you are looking for any support on changing your bedtime boundaries, you want to move away from rocking, feeding, supporting your small to sleep and you're happy to take time and you're looking for some really gentle strategies to help you step it down, give them the time and move away from feeding, rocking or bouncing to sleep, my Bedtime Boundary e-course is a really lovely place to start that. It's a series of videos, it covers all bedtime boundaries and it really goes through it, steps down how to make those changes. It helps you come up with a plan that's going to be a fit for your family if it isn't working for you. And if you are enjoying cuddling, rocking, feeding, supporting your small to sleep, carry on. There is nothing better than small snuggles, small sleepy snuggles. See you next time. Sending you big love and sleep solidarity. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to me, your host Kerry Secker, on the Care It Out Sleep Show. I really hope you found this podcast episode reassuring, informative, but most importantly, it helps you and your small to a more settled night's sleep the caring way. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe to the show below, leave me some feedback or share it with a parent pal. I love hearing that you love listening. My next podcast episode will be available in 2 weeks' time, but if you really can't wait that long, please come and find me over on Instagram at Sleep Consultant. I update my sleep squares and speak about sleep there on the daily. Big love and sleep solidarity. Until next time.